10 p.m. on a Wednesday night. You're playing Commander on Spell Table with some friends. You're on Enchantress. You're behind. You have a board wipe in your hand. If you cast it, you probably don't win anytime soon. You might not win at all. But you get to keep playing. You get another chance to rebuild your board and maybe claw your way back into the game. So you cast it. And everybody groans. Come on, man, I gotta work tomorrow. You can't even win after this. We're never getting another game in. And I get it, I'm 44. I'm tired. I too have to work tomorrow. We started at 8:30 because that's when the kids went to bed. And this was the one night everybody could make work. But I'm sitting here thinking, what was I supposed to do? Scoop because everybody else was ahead? Let the game end because continuing it might interfere with the next one? I had a board wipe. I was still in the game. I used it. And somewhere along the way, we started counting how many Commander games we completed in a night instead of whether we were enjoying the one we were playing. That changed a lot more than I think people realize. I interviewed MTG Malone a couple years ago, and he referred to Commander as a board game style gathering. And that description has stuck with me because that's exactly what Commander was for me. I mean, think about it. You showed up early for F&M and played this weird multiplayer format called EDH before the actual tournament started. Or somebody hosted on a Saturday. You brought cards, food, drinks, whatever. Maybe you ordered a pizza. Maybe you were there all afternoon and into the evening. You played Magic, but there was a lot more happening around the table. People talked about work. Somebody told a story about their partner. Someone had just gotten back from vacation. You caught up on whatever had happened that week. The cards were on the table, along with everything else. Sometimes one game took 3 hours. And I get to some of you that sounds agonizing. Nobody treated that like the evening had gone wrong. Nobody was counting games completed by the hour. If somebody wiped the board 90 minutes in, you cleared your creatures, got up, stretched, grabbed more snacks, and kept going. Maybe the game became a complete disaster after that. Maybe somebody made 80 tokens. Maybe a card nobody has seen since 1998 suddenly became the most important thing on the board. Maybe the player who had been doing nothing for an hour suddenly became the threat. And that was fun. And the decks were messy. Of course they were. A lot of us were building with whatever we had left over from Standard, Modern, Legacy, or the Trade Binder. Commander gave your strange rare somewhere to go. You found some legendary creature you liked and dug through your collection looking for anything that it might work with. You didn't always start with an established deck skeleton. You weren't checking whether you had exactly the right number of draw spells, removal spells, ramp pieces, board wipes, and win cons. You're just trying to make the weird card do something. Sometimes it worked. A lot of times it didn't. When it did, everybody remembered it. A Commander deck could be polished. It could be a pile. It could be held together by 3 cards, hope, and whatever was sitting in your bulk box. And it still belonged at the table. And a big reason those games could work that way was simple. We had time. A lot of us who played that way got older. We're all getting older. We have jobs, children, houses, obligations, and a million other things competing for the same time. An open Saturday afternoon became a Wednesday night from 8:30 to 10:30. The pandemic moved a lot of games online. Spell Table made it possible to keep playing with the people you might not otherwise see, and I'm glad it exists. But an online game schedule between everything else in your life carries a different kind of pressure. There's a clock attached to that session. When everybody only has a couple hours, I understand why they want the game to move. Nobody wants to spend their entire free night watching one player take 20-minute turns. Nobody wants a game where the board resets 6 times and nothing anybody does seems to matter. I understand the frustration. Over time, though, I would like this game to eventually end turned into, we should be able to play multiple games every session. Now, a successful night can mean 3 games. A bad night can mean 1 long game regardless of what happened during that game. A board wipe gets judged whether it adds another 40 minutes before everyone can shuffle up again. A deck that develops slowly is dirtling. A player without a clear win condition is wasting everybody's time. You hear it all the time now. Can we get another one in? Why wipe if you can't win? We should just scoop and go next. Your deck needs a way to close. None of those phrases are ridiculous on their own. I've said some of them too. Taken together, though, they can create an expectation that the current game has to justify continuing. And once the session needs to produce more games, the decks need to behave more predictably inside these games. Board wipes need to lead somewhere. Decks need to close. Players need to spend less time drawing the wrong half of what they built. And that pressure makes a lot of modern Commander advice make sense. There's no shortage of Commander deck building advice now. EDH rec recommendations, deck templates, creator videos, articles explaining how much removal you need, how much ramp you need, how many lands you need, and what turn your deck should be able to win. Hell, the bracket strongly suggests the last one. Run more interaction, lower your curve, play better cards, add more draw, protect your commander, have a reliable win condition, build to the bracket. And a lot of that advice does help. New players need somewhere to begin. Somebody building their first commander deck probably should know that 29 lands and 2 mana rocks and hope is going to create some miserable opening hands. But every deck now seems to be graded against the same expectations. Fix your deck assumes the deck is broken. Maybe it's doing exactly what the person who built it wanted it to do. Most recommendations move in the same direction. The deck becomes more consistent, it gets faster, it interacts more efficiently, it becomes better at finding the cards it needs, and better at ending the game once it gets ahead. And a lot of players want that. Sometimes I don't. Maybe I don't want the best red board wipe. Maybe I want the strange red card that swaps things around or blows things up at random because it's funny. Maybe I don't care whether my win condition arrives on a predictable turn. Maybe I want to find out whether some terrible Voltron idea works once. Then you start filling out the template. Lands, ramp, draw, removal, wipes, protection, finishers. By the time you get through everything a commander deck is supposed to contain, how many cards are actually yours? How many spots are left for that card that made you want to build the deck? There's another expectation hiding in all this. Your deck is supposed to give you a reasonably balanced game every time you shuffle it. Enough mana, enough draw, something to advance your board, sprinkle some interaction, and a path toward winning. When the deck gives you the wrong mix, people start asking what's wrong with the build. Sometimes nothing is wrong. Sometimes a singleton deck just draws weird. And I understand why new players lean on these systems. Building 100 cards from scratch is hard. If you're new to Commander, I don't want to become the person telling you there is a correct way to build. You might want a functional deck right away. You might want something that can sit down in bracket 3 and hold its own. You might want to follow a template because starting at 100 empty slots is terrifying. That's fine. Use EDH rec, watch deck techs, look at your ratios, copy a mana base. Start with somebody else's structure while you figure out what you like. A huge part of learning Commander is putting a card in a deck because you think it might work, and then seeing what actually happens. Sometimes the card is terrible. Sometimes it does exactly what you hoped. Sometimes you cut it after one game. Sometimes it stays in the deck for 10 years because one time it did something nobody at the table expected. That's how you learn what kind of player you are. You learn whether you like controlling the table. You learn whether you like combat. You learn how much theme matters to you. You learn how much variance you enjoy. A template can help your deck function. It can't tell you which cards make you smile when you draw them. You don't need to remove every mistake before you ever shuffle the deck. Build it, play it, let it fail. Maybe the deck needs more lands. Maybe the expensive pet card never does anything. Maybe you accidentally build something much stronger than intended. That's part of learning, and you're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to keep the bad card anyway. Half the fun is finding out. And even after you learn all of that, even after you build carefully and know what the deck is supposed to do, it still won't behave perfectly every time. It's still Commander. I know decks need interaction. I understand what happens when everybody shows up with 4 decks that ignore each other and race toward whatever they're trying to do. So I run removal, I run board wipes, I run counter magic where it makes sense, and sometimes I draw all of it. That happened to me a few months ago. My draws didn't really develop properly. I wasn't presenting a win, but boy did I draw some ways to stop other people from winning. So what am I supposed to do that game? Am I not allowed to cast the cards in my hand because I can't immediately turn around and win? Do I let somebody else run away with the game because my deck gave me the wrong half of itself? Do I just scoop because I drew removal instead of threats? I didn't build a deck designed to hold the table hostage. I had a normal amount of interaction, and I just hit all of it. That happens. Remember, Commander is a 100-card singleton format. Sometimes your draw gets weird. Sometimes you draw 6 lands in a row. Sometimes you never see the card draw you know is in there. Sometimes every expensive creature shows up in your opening hand. Sometimes you draw a board wipe, then another board wipe, then a third piece of removal you really didn't need. And then variance can make the same deck look completely unreasonable. I've played decks in public games that normally behave pretty consistently, and watch them suddenly take off. In one game I played, an opponent had a perfect answer to stop somebody from tutoring for the combo piece that was about to win them the game. Aven Mind Sensor. He flashed it in. The tutor was limited to the top 4 cards, and the other guy just still found it. That night, Aven Mind Sensor became Aven Never Mind Sensor. That's variance. Sometimes your casual deck draws the exact 7 or 8 cards that make it look completely unreasonable, and one outlier game can follow a deck around. With strangers, that may be the only version of the deck they ever see. In a regular group, everybody remembers that time it exploded, and you become the archenemy next time you shuffle it. That one game becomes the deck's reputation. Casual decks have ranges. Sometimes they do nothing, sometimes they look completely unreasonable. One game doesn't always tell you what the deck is. There's no deck building template that completely prevents those outlier games without pushing the deck toward more tutors, more redundancy, more selection, and more consistency. All of that helps the average game show up more often. But the variance is the fun. The variance is why the stories happen. It's why the weird card becomes important. It's why somebody who planned to attack with sea monsters spends the whole night holding counterspells, because that's what they drew. It's why a Yuna deck randomly produces a turn 4 Bahamut and player removal becomes the table's goal. Some decks are fun, specifically because the range is wide. They might be ordinary most of the time. Then every once in a while, everything lines up and the whole table has a story. That's what one of my oldest commander decks felt like. Years ago, I built Lorthos the Tidemaker. Lorthos is an 8 mana mono blue octopus. When it attacks, you can pay another 8 mana to tap 8 permanents, and those permanents don't untap during their controller's next untap step. That's a lot of work by modern standards. It costs 8, it has to survive, it has to attack, then you need another 8 mana. There's no world in 2026 where someone looks at Lorthos and thinks, that's a competitive commander. But my deck had a plan. I ran 38 islands, High Tide, Turnabout, Mana Doublers, Capsize, Tap Effects, Counter Magic, and a pile of sea monsters, merfolk, and cephalids. Giant Oyster was in this deck. Giant Oyster. The deck stayed alive long enough to make a ridiculous amount of blue mana. Then Lorthos came down, and everybody looked at the giant octopus and usually decided something else was more important. That was the fun part. Lorthos didn't surprise anyone. He was sitting in the command zone the entire game. Everybody knew what he did. Everybody knew how much mana I needed. But there was always another creature doing something more immediate. Another commander drawing cards. Another player building a threatening board. So Lorthos stayed. Then I hit a High Tide. Maybe I had a Mana Doubler. Maybe Turnabout was involved. Lorthos attacked, I paid the 8, and suddenly enough permanents were tapped that turns started cycling back to me. That's when everyone regretted letting the big dumb octopus remain on the board. Would anyone call this a good deck today? Probably not. It still worked. It could control the board, it could make a lot of mana, it could land its commander, and it could win games. It didn't do it quickly or consistently. The inconsistency was part of why it was fun. I didn't know whether I was drawing Giant Oyster, High Tide, Capsize, or some enormous sea monster. The games didn't follow the same sequence every time. A modern deck review could improve nearly every part of it. Cut Giant Oyster, cut the weaker cephalids, improve the ramp, lower the curve, replace the clunky counterspells, add cleaner win cons, maybe eventually replace Lorthos with a commander that does something sooner. And after enough changes, it gets hard to find the reason why I built the deck in the first place. The whole idea was to make an 8 mana octopus matter. I wanted Lorthos, and today, if I wanted to explain that deck to a table, I'd probably be asked to describe its average game. That's where this starts getting difficult. Brackets want us to describe the average game. What does a deck usually do? When does it usually get going? How does it usually win? That makes sense as a starting point. People need some idea of what they're sitting down against. But the average is being treated like a promise. A lower bracket deck should naturally have a wider range. It has few tutors, less redundancy, and more experimental cards. The deck may have a perfectly fair average and still produce one game where everything lines up. It may also produce a game where nothing lines up. If I tell you my deck normally gets going around turn 7, and this happens to be the one game where it explodes on turn 4, I didn't necessarily misrepresent it. You may be just watching variance take the wheel. If I tell you a deck has a healthy amount of interaction and then draw 6 removal spells, the deck didn't suddenly become a control deck. You may just be watching a weird draw. The average game gives us useful information, but it doesn't describe every game the deck is capable of producing. And I'm not sure what casual means to people anymore. Bracket 3 is supposedly casual Commander, but the expectation still seems to be smooth mana, efficient answers, strong threat assessment, consistent development, and a clear way to close. That's a lot of consistency being expected from a casual singleton deck. The outliers keep getting treated as problems. The deck pops off, and you misrepresented it. The deck stalls, and you built it badly. You draw all removal, and you're table police. You draw no removal, and dude, run more interaction. It starts to feel like variance itself is a faux pas. I'm expected to run plenty of interaction, draw the socially correct amount of it, use it only on the proper threats, and somehow have a win ready so nobody feels like I delayed the next game. I can control how I build the deck. I cannot control the order of the cards after I shuffle it. Sometimes I'm interaction guy. Sometimes the weird card gets there. That's what I shuffled up for. And maybe the real question is whether I even want every game to look like the average. I know Commander games need to end. I know people have limited time. I know there are miserable 3-hour games where nothing happens, nobody can close, and everybody wishes they had done something else with their evening. I've been in those games too. One long game can still be a great Commander night. Maybe the board wipe at 10 p.m. leads nowhere. Maybe we rebuild and play for another hour and I still lose. Or maybe the entire game changes. Maybe somebody draws the exact strange card they needed. Maybe a player who was completely out of it comes back. Maybe an interaction happens that none of us have seen before. Maybe the game becomes the one we talk about months later. For example, one night we had a player resolve a Hullbreaker Horror. When we finally got an opening, another player's only answer was Chaos Warp. Great, do it. Shuffle, shuffle, shit, it's back. Sometimes variance does the thing for you. I don't even remember who won that night. Nobody remembers what turn my Lorthos deck was capable of winning. But they do remember that everyone let an 8-mana octopus sit there because they thought something else was scarier. They remember Giant Oyster took 5 turns to eat their creature. They remember when their permanents stopped untapping, and they collectively realized they had made a terrible decision. They'll remember turn 4 Bahamut too. They'll remember removing me before it went off. That was the fun win condition. The deck didn't need to produce it every night. If it had, the story probably wouldn't have mattered nearly as much. So who says my Commander decks need to be optimized? Who decided that a successful night is the one where we shuffle up the most? I still want decks to do weird things. I want cards that have no business being important to become the most important card on the table. I want someone to read Giant Oyster because they have never genuinely seen it before. I want my own deck to surprise me. Maybe it draws the wrong half. Maybe it takes off. Maybe we only get one game in. If that game gives us something worth remembering, I'm good with that. Winning isn't everything to everyone. For some of us, the gathering is.